Monopoly. The heroic tale of 2 to 6 capitalists stumbling upon a rich stretch of undeveloped land and bringing their immense resources to bear in developing the area up to its full potential. Or alternatively, the tale of Uncle Tim somehow wheeling and dealing his way into monopolizing the whole region's rail network, which he then parlays into buying up the whole northern side of the board to suck us all dry with his ludicrously overpriced hotels. In any case, those aren't the tales we'll be participating in today, because today our quest is to discover the following. Is it possible to win Monopoly without building any houses? So, how exactly are we going to test out this question? I mean, technically we could just play Monopoly with some people, but I don't have enough friends to just casually lose them to this endeavor. Besides, I wouldn't want them to try to intentionally lose for the sake of the challenge. Instead, we will be playing the video game Monopoly Plus against 3 normal difficulty AI opponents. If we can win a game of Monopoly bankrupting all of them without building any houses or hotels, then that's what I can call a success. So, with the rules and parameters established, let's talk strategy. Now I know what most of you are probably thinking. You've lost your mind, CMeeCraft. The words Monopoly and strategy don't belong in the same zip code, let alone sentence together. It's a luck-based roll and move game for crying out loud. And, well, you're not wrong that Monopoly does involve a fair bit of luck. But that doesn't mean there's no skill involved. Just like how in poker you can't affect what hand you get dealt, but you can affect your success in the game by knowing when to hold 'em and when to fold 'em. Monopoly is similar. You don't have any real way to affect the properties you land on to purchase in the first few cycles around the board, but what you can control is how you leverage the portfolio you do acquire into various trades and deals to get you ahead. And the way I see it, there is a simple 4-step strategy we can employ that should give us a good chance of success should we be able to execute it. Step number 1, acquire at least 1 property of each color. Step number 2, monopolize the railways. Step number 3, we'll come back to this one. And step number 4, profits. Which, in this case means win. Alright, let's tackle step 1. As we already went over, we'll be playing a 4-player game of Monopoly against normal difficulty AIs. Mike, Emmeline, and Marie. And luckily, I rolled high enough to go first. This is useful because especially during the snatching up properties phase of the game, Monopoly definitely does have some first move advantage. Anyway, our first roll lands us on Baltic Avenue, which we of course purchase, and our second gives us a chance to buy Connecticut Avenue. That means after just 2 turns of play, we're already a quarter of the way to completing step 1 of our plan, obtaining at least 1 property of each color. Now, it's pretty self-evident why that is our step 1, but for those of you less familiar with Monopoly, allow me to explicitly spell it out. Typically, the way Monopoly works is you run all around the board, buying properties, and occasionally trading with each other in hopes of getting full color sets, or monopolies as the game likes to call them. The reason you want to have monopolies, other than just the fact that it's the name of the game, is because you can only start building houses once you've secured a monopoly, just like in real life. Now, the reason you want to have houses, and eventually hotels, is because having houses on your properties greatly increases the rent your opponents must pay you when they land on your properties. The goal is to, of course, bankrupt your opponents by taking all of their money, so obviously charging them more for rent is greatly beneficial towards that end. Now, we of course can't actually build any houses, so collecting monopolies really isn't that important to us. What is important, though, is making sure our opponents can't get any monopolies. Remember, our opponents are still perfectly free to build houses and hotels to their heart's content. Mark my words, if any of our opponents can manage to put a house down, it's going to be game over for us. That's why we need to control at least 1 property of each color, because if I can't build, then gosh darn no one else is going to either. Unfortunately, on this first pass around the board, we aren't able to buy any of the pinks or oranges. Instead, we snagged a railway. We're still after some trading shenanigans. Emmeline has already acquired 2 of the 3 pink properties. Now, we could offer her a decent sum of money to buy one of those properties right here now, but I think at least for now we should be fine to preserve our capital and just let it ride. And what are the odds she lands on the other one, right? On the next side of the board, we are lucky enough to land on both a red and a yellow, bringing us halfway to our goal of obtaining one of each color. Though it should be noted that we've also blown through well over half of our starting capital, and we haven't even bought from the most expensive side of the board yet. Back on the pink-orange side of the board, things are getting a bit dicey. Each of our opponents have managed to acquire one of the oranges. As it stands right now, they've seemed to reach an impasse, but we'll definitely need to trade for one of those sometime soon before they find a way to consolidate. And by soon, I mean immediately. We roll so high on our next turn that we entirely skip the expensive side of the board, instead landing on an unowned Mediterranean avenue, which we of course purchase, granting us a monopoly on the browns. Wow, a monopoly acquired after just one lap around the board. Surely our opponents would be willing to pay a pretty price to break it up. To the negotiating table we go. Now I considered offering Emmeline Mediterranean Avenue for her orange property, St. James Place. But I figured, what the heck, let's see if she'll accept an all-cash offer first. The face value of St. James Place is $180, so we offer a slight premium of $200 for the property, which she accepts. Alright, crisis averted. And then we roll again and buy another railroad while we're in the area. By the time our turn comes around again, 2 of the greens and the waterworks have been purchased by our opponents. Meanwhile, I'm over here wasting time landing on free parking. And no, we don't have the money on free parking house rule enabled. We're playing with strict, standard, by-the-book Monopoly rules. And actually, our opponents are about to pass by the pinks again, so maybe now would be the right time to trade for States Avenue. Our offer of $150 is rejected, so instead we offer $200, which Emmeline accepts. Alright, now we just need to obtain a dark blue and a green. Not quite sure how we're going to do that with only $130 in liquid reserves, but hey, life finds a way, am I right? Decent timing on snatching that pink though, because on her very next turn, Marie buys the last one. Concerningly though, the greens are starting to get consolidated, with Mike and Marie striking a deal that gives Marie control of 2 of the 3 of them. Now unfortunately, we really don't have the cash to make a serious attempt at buying one of those off her right now. Like seriously, we barely have any cash right now. We only have $30 in the old bank account after having to pay to get out of jail and then pay some school fees. So let's just hope for the time being that Marie isn't the one to land on the last green. And of course, she landed on it. That's a monopoly, folks, and in all likelihood, the beginning of our inevitable demise. Luckily, she doesn't have the money to start building houses on the green just yet, so I guess we can take at least one shot at trading her for one of the greens. I wouldn't get my hopes up, though. One of the major issues here is that we, like I previously said, have basically no cash to use to make a deal. Although, if we mortgage some properties, that could allow us to be a bit more liquid. Alright, Illinois Avenue and Marvin Gardens, consider yourselves mortgaged. Aggressively leveraging our existing properties to pay for a new property, what's the worst that could happen? We offer $100 Mediterranean Avenue and Pennsylvania Railroad in exchange for Pacific Avenue. Technically, what we're offering is of higher face value, and the deal breaks up our monopoly in exchange for breaking up hers, so hopefully she takes it. She does. Oh, crisis averted. Yes, we traded away one of our railroads to make it happen, and yes, owning all 4 railroads is step 2 of our plan, but we won't even get to step 2 if step 1 fails, so it was, in my opinion, a necessary sacrifice. Now we just need to get our hands on one of the dark blue properties, and Mike already owns Boardwalk. And now Emmeline owns Park Place. After we pass go, we've got to try to bring one of them to the negotiating table before they make a deal with each other. But even after passing go, we still don't have enough cash to make a serious offer. And I really don't want to give any more of my properties away. I guess that means it's mortgaging time again. Hopefully Pacific Avenue will be enough. And yes, we are currently taking out a loan against the property we bought by taking out a loan against our other properties to buy a property. Some may call it over-leveraging, I call it good business. Anyway, luckily $380, only $30 over the property's face value, proves to be enough to prompt Emmeline to part ways with the property. And there we go, that's step 1 completed. We now control one of each color property. Now we'll never have to worry about landing on expensive houses or hotels. The only problem is that we're nearly broke and have mortgaged most of our more valuable properties, and therefore don't currently make any rent when our opponents land on them. Our next goal is to acquire the best moneymaker left on the board, the railroads. But first we'll need to find a way to raise some capital. Now, the obvious way to go about acquiring some cash would be by traveling around the board and passing go a few times. The only issue with that is that our opponents are doing a pretty good job at bleeding us dry as we attempt to make our way around the board, even causing us to have to mortgage a few more properties, which only further compounds our issues since mortgaging our properties cuts off the revenue we could have otherwise gained from them, and therefore makes it so we lose money even faster. Honestly, I'm kind of worried we might be heading for bankruptcy here. Of course, getting sent to jail quite a bit doesn't exactly help with that. I mean, sure, you can collect rent while you're in jail, but at this point we've mortgaged so many of our properties that that's almost entirely a non-factor. But what really doesn't help is landing on the income tax as we pass go 3 times in a row! Eventually, though, we do manage to evade the taxes and finally scrounge together enough cash to buy a railroad for 10% over the face value, as well as start to unmortgage some of our properties. It's a painfully slow process to gain the cash to claw back our mortgaged properties and buy the railroads. But luckily, the more properties we unmortgage and the more railroads we purchase, the faster that process becomes. And thankfully, our opponents seem to be very poor at factoring intangibles into their assessments of a property's value. They seem to just look at me offering $220 for a railroad and think, "Sweet, that's $20 more than I paid for it! That's a 10% ROI right there! I'll take it!" So basically, the AI is seemingly always willing to trade a property for slightly over its face value in cash. That should actually serve to make our lives a lot easier than I was expecting, so I am glad for that. A few more rotations around the board and we successfully unmortgage all of our properties, and manage to trade our way to owning all of the railroads. So there we go, that is step 2 achieved. Now what? Well, step 3, we never actually worked out what that was going to be. Well, the railroads are the best moneymakers on the board, but will we really be able to ride our way to victory purely on their efficacy? I'm doubtful. Well, we have already seen that the AIs aren't exactly terribly attached to their properties, so I wonder, we are clearly no longer anywhere near being at risk of bankruptcy due to our railroad profits, so maybe we could just buy literally all of the properties on the board from our opponents? It's ambitious, but I see no reason why it couldn't work.
Be an offer. Nice.
About 40 minutes later, we actually managed to do just that. We now own every single property on the board. Unfortunately, paying our opponents to acquire said properties has enriched them to a, quite frankly, ludicrous degree. The wealthiest of them being Mike with about $4,000 to his name. So I guess, quite literally, we have done everything we can now to ensure a victorious outcome. Now it is literally just up to the rolls of the dice. I think on average we should be siphoning over $200 from each of our opponents for each of their revolutions around the board, and as long as that's true, we should eventually win. But I guess we'll just have to wait and see. Finally, 3 hours after having monopolized the whole board, Marie is the first one eliminated, bankrupted by Marvin Gardens. Emmeline is next to go at about 3.5 hours after we concluded buying up everything at B&O Railroad. And at last, 5 hours after we monopolized the whole board, and 7 hours, 12 minutes, and 8 seconds after the start of the game, Mike took a trip on the short line straight to bankruptcy. So, is it possible to win Monopoly without building any houses? Yes. Though it's a slog, and you effectively have to hold the whole game hostage by locking everyone else out from getting monopolies, it can be done. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, you may want to check out some of my other challenge videos, including one for chess and one for Catan. You'll also probably want to subscribe and ring the bell for notifications. If you have any suggestions for future videos, please leave a comment detailing it, and until next time, I've been CMeeCraft, and I'll catch you in the next video. Good night.